Welcome to Detective Reddington's office. Take a seat and listen to this story. It will be interesting. I always thought I knew Sarah inside and out. We've been together for 10 years, gone through a lot of ups and downs. My job often took me away from home for days at a time, and she always reassured me that everything was fine, everything was under control. The kids, the house, our marriage. It all seemed in order. But recently, something started gnawing at me. Maybe it was the little things I used to ignore, like how she started spending more time on her phone or how she never left it out of sight anymore. It was always in her hand, in her pocket, on the table next to the bed, even in the bathroom. Before, phones used to lie around everywhere in our house. If I needed to call someone or use her phone, there were no issues. But now, not a chance. Sarah always locked it. And it became a habit so quickly that I began to ask myself, damn, what are you hiding? Naturally, I'm not the kind of guy who gives in to emotions just like that. I decided to think things through first and observe before jumping to conclusions. But deep down, something was eating away at me. It's like trying to ignore that your house is on fire, thinking, maybe it's just the light playing tricks. But when the smell of smoke becomes stronger, you can't sit still and pretend everything's fine. Last Saturday, I caught her texting. She was sitting in the kitchen with her phone, and each time the screen lit up, her face changed. Like some play of light and shadow, tense for a moment, then smiling. I watched her quickly turn off the screen whenever I entered the room, and it was really starting to piss me off. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Rachel," she replied, like it was the most normal thing in the world. But something about her response seemed off. She said it too fast. And those little details, insignificant at first, started to piece together in my head. I decided I'd stop playing dumb. There was something wrong here. I tried to brush off all my suspicions. My mind was telling me that maybe it was just my imagination. Sarah had always been honest with me, or at least I thought she was. Maybe it was just work stress, and she was texting her friend to blow off some steam. But still, damn, that feeling just wouldn't go away. For the next few days, I started paying more attention to her behavior. She was staying late at work more often but wasn't explaining why. Before, she would tell me everything in detail about her projects at work, and we could talk about it for hours. But now, discussions about work were brief and vague, like, same old stuff. That only fed my suspicions. Every time I approached her or pretended to show interest in her day, she seemed to shut down. One time, I jokingly asked, "Hey, give me your phone. Show me what's happening at work." She laughed it off and changed the subject so quickly I didn't even have time to push it. Too quickly. That was the moment I realized it was pointless to just sit and wait. I needed a plan. But what was I supposed to do? Check her phone? That would be too obvious. Plus, I didn't even know the password. She changed it a few months ago, and even then, it struck me as odd. I called my friend Mark. He works in a law firm and often deals with divorces and infidelity cases. Mark was the kind of friend who never asked unnecessary questions but always had a plan for any situation. "Hey, John." Mark answered my call. "Something up?" I told him what had been going on. Honestly, it wasn't easy to talk about. Felt like I was admitting my own failure. But he listened quietly. "You know, man," he said after I finished, "I think you already know something's wrong. But you need proof, right?" "Yeah," I replied. "I can't just accuse her without evidence. That would be dumb. What if I'm wrong?" Mark chuckled over the phone. I knew he understood me. "Listen up, John. I can introduce you to a private investigator. If you want to know the truth, it's the quickest and cleanest way. No need for any silly phone games." Private investigator? That sounded extreme. But I couldn't just sit around anymore. I decided to talk to him. What did I have to lose? If everything turned out to be nothing, I'd back off. But if not, private investigators always seemed like something out of a movie to me. Hell, I didn't even think people like that really existed in our world. But there I was, sitting in a cafe, waiting for a guy named Larry, recommended by Mark. I was a bit tense, though I didn't want to show it. For some reason, it felt like I was already crossing a line I never thought I would. When Larry walked into the cafe, I knew right away it was him. A short man, about 45, with graying hair and a calm, almost cold gaze. He looked like someone who had seen it all. That calmed me down. I needed someone exactly like him. We quickly got to business. I told him about my suspicions, how Sarah had become distant, changed her phone password, and always found excuses to stay late at work. Larry listened quietly, nodding, only occasionally asking questions. I felt awkward even talking to him about this, but it seemed like the right thing to do. "How much time do you need?" I asked when I finished. "Usually it takes a couple of weeks," he replied calmly. "But a lot depends on how careful she is. If it's a typical affair, we'll figure it out quickly." His confidence reassured me. I wasn't thrilled about what I had to do, but there was no turning back. Now I couldn't stop. "And one more thing, John," Larry added. "Prepare for the worst. Even if you already suspect something, seeing the truth is always a punch in the gut." He was right. I was ready for that punch. All I needed was the truth, whatever it turned out to be. A week passed since Larry took the case. I didn't know what exactly he was doing, and honestly, it was better that way. I'm not the type who needs to know every detail. My job was to find out the truth, and once I got it, everything that came before wouldn't matter. Sarah kept acting like everything was fine. She smiled, asked about my day, and even suggested we go somewhere on the weekend. I watched her, listened to her voice, and every word seemed so fake to me. I kept wondering if I could trust her at all anymore. She always hid her phone, grew colder and colder, yet still played the role of the perfect wife. Pissed me off. And the worst part? I couldn't believe a single thing she said anymore. Larry sent me short updates every morning. Everything's going as planned or no changes yet. He was doing his job and all I could do was wait. It was unbearable. I couldn't sit still, knowing that soon I'd find out everything. One evening, when Sarah was staying late at work again, I decided to act on my own. She said she'd be home by 10. I waited until 8 and then left the house. Her car was parked outside the office, but when I went inside, the office was dark. Just a few computers glowing in the empty space. I'd had enough of this. I called Larry to see if he knew where she was. "She's not at the office," I said flatly. "I know," he replied. "She's at a restaurant with a guy. John, I think you should stay home. I'm getting everything on record." I almost lost control. A restaurant? With some guy? Damn. At that moment, I wanted to drop everything and head over there. But Larry stopped me. "Don't lose your head. You'll get the proof, but not now. This isn't the time to barge into a restaurant and make a scene. Let me do my job." I gripped my phone tightly, barely holding myself back. My trust in him was hanging by a thread. But I forced myself to calm down and went back home. I felt like I was sitting on a ticking time bomb. My marriage was crumbling right in front of me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Every time Sarah came home and kissed me on the cheek, I could feel the rage boiling inside me. But I kept quiet. Couldn't let myself lose it. All I had left to do was wait for Larry's findings. The next morning, he emailed me a few photos. There weren't many, but it was enough to make me want to burn the whole world down. In the pictures, Sarah was sitting at a table in a restaurant, cozying up to that same guy I'd seen at her office before. They were holding hands, laughing. I stopped at one photo where he stroked her arm, and she smiled at him in a way she hadn't smiled at me in a long time. This wasn't just some casual meeting. They were clearly more than friends. I stood in my living room, staring at the photos on my phone, feeling something break inside me. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was the truth. She was cheating on me. I forwarded the photos to Larry and asked him what the next step was. "I'll keep following her," he texted back. "This is just the beginning. We need more." Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, blow up everything in her face. But another part, the colder, more calculating part, knew I had to wait. I had just started collecting the evidence, and this was only the start. For the next week, I tried to act normal. I kept going to work, talking to her, even though every word she said felt like a lie. I'd watch her closely, looking for any new signs of deception. Every time she talked about work or friends, all I could hear was the echo of betrayal. Her words meant nothing to me anymore. When she went to bed, I'd stay up, scrolling through those photos again and again. I could feel my anger turning into something darker. This wasn't just about her cheating. This was about her destroying everything we had built together. But instead of losing control, I began planning. My plan had to be flawless. I couldn't afford any mistakes. Every day after seeing those photos felt like a test of endurance. When you know the truth but can't act on it right away, it's like torture. I wanted to blow everything up, storm into the room, grab her phone, and lay down an ultimatum. But every time I felt like I was going to snap, I held myself back with a cold resolve. I wasn't going to make any rash decisions. I started watching her even more closely. Every movement, every glance, every word. It all mattered now. I was looking for new clues, even though Larry had already done most of the work. What bothered me was how long this had been going on. How long had she been playing this role of the perfect wife while living a completely different life? One night stands out in my memory. We were having dinner, sitting together with the kids, and she was smiling, telling some story from work. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Do you really want to keep pretending?" I said it so sharply that even the kids looked at me, confused. Sarah stopped mid-sentence, her smile vanishing. She didn't answer. Her eyes darted away, and I could tell she was trying to collect herself, but she didn't know how. "What do you mean, Dad?" my daughter asked, staring at me with a puzzled expression. I got up from the table abruptly, not even looking at the kids, and left the room. I couldn't keep playing this ridiculous charade anymore. Let her deal with her lies. I barely managed to hold back from exploding in front of the kids, but I knew I couldn't hold on much longer. That night, I decided it was time to take action. I wasn't going to sit around and watch her scramble to cover her tracks any longer. I was ready to go all the way. Each day felt like a new battle. I was becoming more withdrawn, but I held on to my cold determination. After seeing those photos, there was no turning back. Now, I was playing a game where my opponent was Sarah. The woman I once loved had become an enemy, even though she didn't know it yet. The following weeks felt like hell. Larry kept sending me more evidence. Videos of them together at restaurants, sitting close, being careful, but not careful enough to hide the truth from me. They weren't just work colleagues. It was clear as day. She was with him while pretending everything was fine between us. Every move, every word, every smile she gave me now seemed like part of a lie. I was gathering all the evidence I needed to be ready for when I made my move. But it was a long process. I didn't just want her to know I knew. I wanted her to feel the full force of what she had done. Simple divorce? Too easy. No, I had something else in mind. My plan was to destroy her life the way she had destroyed mine. One evening, while Sarah was out at another meeting, I sat in the kitchen with my laptop and started writing an email to her parents. Her parents always thought of their daughter as a model of honesty and integrity. They believed our marriage was perfect. This email was about to turn their world upside down. I wasn't going to reveal everything all at once. This was just the first step in my game. I wrote a short, direct message, no emotion, just facts. I attached a few photos as proof. The email was precise, cold, calculated. I hit send, and there was no going back. Now, time was on my side. I knew her parents' reaction would be the first domino in a chain that would lead to the big conversation. Sarah had no idea that her own lies were about to blow up in her face. The next day started as usual. Sarah woke up early, smiling as she made coffee, acting like everything was fine. We sat in the kitchen. She talked about her plans for the day, and I listened, barely containing my sarcastic comments. Her sweet smile no longer had any effect on me. Felt more like a bad performance. I knew her parents had received my email. I could imagine them sitting at home, reading those lines. Her mother, who always thought I was the perfect son-in-law, would be in shock. Her father, he was more reserved, but I knew this would shatter his image of our perfect family. I waited for their reaction all day. Sooner or later, they would call. This wasn't just any letter. It was a bombshell that would blow apart the illusion Sarah had built so carefully. I didn't care how she would try to talk her way out of it. I wanted the truth to be known. I wanted everyone to see who she really was. That evening, as we sat together on the couch, her phone suddenly rang. I knew who it was. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and froze for a second. It was her father. She answered, "Hey, Dad," her voice soft. At first, she didn't realize what was coming. I watched her face, waiting for the conversation to shift. At first, she seemed calm, but then something changed. Her eyes widened, and she tensed up. "What? I don't understand," she said, her voice rising with panic. She stopped mid-sentence, and I knew they had told her. She glanced sharply at me, but I sat there with the same blank expression I'd worn all day. Her face went pale. She couldn't hide her fear anymore. She listened to whatever her father was saying, but I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out what was happening. I just watched, letting her face the consequences. This was only the beginning. That evening was the first time in a long while that we had a real conversation. After the call with her father, Sarah sat on the couch, staring at me. I could see the confusion, the panic in her eyes as she tried to make sense of everything. "John," she began slowly. "What's going on? My parents said you wrote them some kind of letter. They said you accused me of cheating. What is this nonsense?" Her voice was shaky. She wasn't prepared for this. She didn't expect me to be this decisive. I kept a cold, unreadable expression, just like I'd planned. "Nonsense." I raised my voice slightly. "This isn't nonsense, Sarah. I know you've been cheating on me. I know you've been seeing someone else for months. And you dare call it nonsense?" She froze. Her eyes glistened, but not with tears. This was fear. The real kind. The one she had been trying to suppress for weeks. But now it was written all over her face. "That's not true," she blurted out, as if trying to convince herself more than me. "This is some kind of horrible misunderstanding. John, I love you. This is just a terrible mistake." I laughed. It was a bitter, cold laugh of someone who no longer had faith in any of her words. "Mistake," I repeated, looking at her with disbelief. "Then what about the photos, Sarah? Do you consider those a mistake too? Do you want to tell me that wasn't you sitting in a restaurant with another man? That it wasn't you holding his hand?" Her face drained of all color. She couldn't deny it anymore. All her attempts to lie her way out of this were pathetic at best. "I didn't," she started, but couldn't finish. "Shut up." I cut her off, my anger finally surfacing. "Just shut up. I already know everything, Sarah. And I don't want to hear your excuses." Silence fell between us. She was speechless, and I just stood there, feeling the last remnants of trust disintegrate. This wasn't the Sarah I married. The woman sitting in front of me had destroyed everything we had built. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked, her voice barely holding together. "What am I going to do?" I repeated. "Good question, Sarah. You'll find out soon enough." After our talk, everything became even more tense. Sarah no longer tried to act like everything was fine. The mask had fallen, and there was no putting it back on. I could see the guilt, the fear in her every move. She was no longer in control, and she knew it. She didn't ask me what I knew or how I had found out. I think she realized there was no point. The fear of what would happen next was written all over her face, but she still pretended to go through the motions of our daily life. The silence between us became almost unbearable. The kids hadn't noticed anything yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they would. Every day felt like a small war. She went through the routines of being a wife and mother, while I quietly watched her try to keep up appearances. I couldn't trust her anymore. Everything she said or did felt like part of the same lie she'd been living for months. My emotions were under control, though I felt like it wouldn't last much longer. The more I watched her act like nothing was wrong, the more it infuriated me. One evening, we were sitting together with the kids in the living room, and she was smiling, telling stories about her day at work. I couldn't take it anymore. "Are you really going to keep up this lie?" I said sharply, making even the kids look at me in surprise. Sarah stopped, her smile dropping instantly. She didn't say a word. Her eyes flickered with fear, and I could tell she was trying to figure out how to respond, but she was at a loss. What do you mean, Dad? My daughter asked, looking at me, confused. I stood up abruptly, not even glancing at the kids, and walked out of the room. I couldn't sit there and pretend anymore. Let her deal with her lies on her own. I barely managed to hold it together in front of the kids, but I knew my patience was running out. That night, I decided it was time to make my move. I was done waiting and watching her scramble to cover her tracks. Now it was my turn to take control. The next morning looked like any other. Sarah was trying to act normal, though I could see the guilt weighing her down. But none of that mattered anymore. Today I was making my move. I had everything I needed to put an end to this. I got a message from Larry in the morning. He had completed his work. He had everything, the videos, the photos, the details of their meetings, everything I could use against her. This was the final step, and now it was all up to me. After the kids left for school, I returned home and found Sarah in the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her eyes red, probably from crying all night. Maybe she sensed something was coming. "Can we talk?" I asked, sitting down at the table across from her. She nodded but didn't say anything. Silence filled the room, and for a moment, I wasn't even sure how to begin. "I know everything, Sarah," I finally said. Her reaction was quiet, almost without sound. She didn't even try to deny it. "You had your chance to come clean, but you kept lying," I continued, feeling the anger rising inside me again. "It doesn't matter anymore." Sarah lowered her head. I could see her hands trembling, but I didn't care. I felt no pity, no sympathy, no pain anymore, just cold resolve. "We're done. I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said with a calmness that surprised even me. "You've lost everything, Sarah, and it's your fault." She lifted her head, and I saw the fear in her eyes. The same fear she had been trying to hide for weeks, but now it was fully exposed. "I didn't want it to end like this," she started, but I cut her off by raising my hand sharply. "I don't care what you wanted," I said coldly. "It's over. I'll tell the kids soon. You don't deserve another chance." Silence fell between us again. There was nothing more for her to say. I could see the last traces of hope vanish from her face. My decision was final. I stood up from the table and walked out, leaving her sitting alone in the kitchen. I didn't want to hear her excuses anymore. For me, this was the end. Now that all the cards were on the table, I could move on to the next step, officially filing for divorce. My lawyer, James, was sharp and professional. He knew how to handle these situations and understood my motivations. We met in his office to go over the details. "How do you want to handle this?" James asked as we sat down. "I want her to get nothing," I said without hesitation. "She's lost the right to anything. The house, the kids. Everything should go to me." James nodded, jotting down notes in his legal pad. He was the kind of lawyer who knew how to play dirty when necessary, and that was exactly what I needed. He didn't ask unnecessary questions or get involved in emotions. This was pure business. "I've seen all the materials you sent me," he continued. "There's more than enough here to get you everything you're asking for." That reassured me. I knew justice would be on my side. Sarah had betrayed me, and now she would pay for it. "The only challenge might be the custody battle," James added. "Are you asking for full custody?" I paused for a moment. The kids were my world, and I didn't want them dragged into this mess. But I also couldn't let Sarah have the same influence over them as she had over me. "Yes," I replied firmly. "I want full custody." James nodded again, making more notes. "It won't be easy, but we have a good case," he said. "We can argue that she's unstable. Could help tip the scales in your favor." I felt like every step was bringing me closer to the final goal. This was more than just a divorce. It was a fight for justice. The hardest part of all of this was telling the kids that Sarah and I were getting divorced. I didn't want to do it. They were too young to understand why their parents wouldn't be together anymore. But I couldn't keep putting it off. That evening, I gathered them in the living room while Sarah stayed in the bedroom. Having her there would only make this conversation worse. "I need to talk to you about something important," I began, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. The kids looked up at me, not knowing what was coming. Mom and I have decided that we're not going to stay together. But that doesn't mean we'll stop loving you. We'll always be your parents. Their eyes widened, and I saw the worry spread across Lily's face. She was always the sensitive one, and I knew this news would hit her the hardest. Is it because Mom did something bad? My youngest son asked, already picking up on the tension. I hesitated for a moment. How could I answer that? The truth was too heavy for their age. No, I said softly. Sometimes things just don't work out between adults. It wasn't the best answer, but I couldn't drag them into this mess. #### Part 14. Divorce on the horizon. After the talk with the kids, a weight lifted off my shoulders. It had been one of the hardest moments of my life, but now everything was slowly coming to a conclusion. Sarah had stopped pretending that things were fine between us. She finally understood what was inevitable: divorce. I met with James, my lawyer, one more time to finalize our strategy. We decided to file for divorce officially, using all the evidence of her infidelity. I wanted it to be clean and emotionless, at least on paper. Even though rage still burned inside me, I didn't let it take control. I stayed cold and focused as I had from the beginning. Sarah didn't fight to save our marriage anymore. I think she finally realized that I had already made my decision. The distance between us became so obvious that even our neighbors began to suspect something. They didn't see us together anymore. No more trips to the grocery store, no more family outings. We became strangers living under the same roof, and it was a strange feeling. Living with someone you once loved but now couldn't even look at. One evening, after the kids went to bed, Sarah approached me. She looked defeated, broken almost. It was clear she knew she had lost everything. "John," she started quietly, "I know it's too late to ask, but is there any chance we could fix this?" I looked at her. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she looked like a woman who had finally realized she had lost all hope. "No, Sarah," I answered calmly. "There's nothing left to fix." My voice was direct, cold, but it reflected exactly how I felt. There was no possibility of forgiveness. She had betrayed my trust, and that couldn't be repaired. "I understand," she whispered, lowering her head. "I just wanted to try." We didn't speak after that. She quietly went to bed, and I sat on the couch, staring into the darkness. I didn't feel relief or satisfaction. It was more like emptiness that couldn't be filled. But I knew I had made the right choice. Our story was already approaching its end. Now, it was just a matter of time before the official divorce would put the final period on our life together. Our divorce went through faster than I expected. My lawyers made sure I had the upper hand. In court, Sarah didn't fight back. Maybe she realized she had lost this battle before it even began. All the evidence I gathered played a key role in making sure the judge ruled in my favor. I won custody of the kids, and Sarah was left with almost nothing. I remember the moment the judge declared our divorce final. Sarah sat next to me, staring at the floor. I looked at her, and she was no longer the woman I once loved. She was a stranger, someone I barely recognized. And as our lives were officially split apart, I felt both relief and a bitter awareness that it was truly over. After court, I walked home alone. The kids stayed with me, and Sarah moved in with her parents. I didn't block her from seeing the kids, but as far as our relationship went, it was done. I no longer wanted her to be a part of my life. The first few weeks after the divorce were tough. I was trying to adjust to this new life. The kids were in shock, but gradually we began to recover. I spent more time with them, making sure they felt loved and supported, trying to fill the void left by the breakup of our family. Life became different, but it moved on. Sometimes I thought about Sarah, about the moments when we were happy together, but those memories no longer hurt. They became part of the past, something that no longer had any hold over my present. I started focusing more on my career, the kids, and myself. My business started to thrive, and I felt like I was becoming the man I was before all of this happened. I no longer lived with constant anxiety or doubt. My life had returned to some sense of normalcy, and it felt like a huge relief. After some time, I met another woman. She was different, honest, open, without hidden agendas or lies. We took things slow, and for the first time in a long while I felt like I could trust someone again. Sarah would text me occasionally, asking about the kids, but our conversations remained brief and formal. I didn't care about her life anymore, and I didn't try to find out how she was spending her days. For me, she stayed in the past and my life moved forward. My new life was simpler, less dramatic. I had learned that you always have to trust your gut and not delay decisions that can save you from pain. I knew I'd never be as naive as I once was, but I also learned how to let go of the past and not let it drag me down. The divorce was tough, but it was the right move. I came out of it stronger, and now I was ready for a new chapter in life.